The Tale of Princess Kaguya, the Japanese moon princess. In the ancient land of Yamato, where mist clings to mountain peaks like silk veils and bamboo forests whisper secrets to the wind, there exists a story that has been passed down through countless generations. This is the tale of Take Torai Monogatari, the story of the bamboo cutter, a narrative woven from moonlight and sorrow, wonder and inevitable loss. It is the story of Princess Kaguya, the child who fell from the heavens, and it begins as all great tales do, in the most unexpected of ways. The discovery. The sun had barely crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of persimmon and gold, when Take Torai no Okina made his way into the vast bamboo grove that had been his livelihood for more years than he could count. Okina, whose name meant old man, was indeed advanced in years. His back bore the permanent curve of decades spent bending among the bamboo, and his hands were gnarled like ancient tree roots, calloused from countless cuts and scrapes. Yet his eyes remained sharp and clear, able to distinguish the perfect bamboo stalk from among thousands. The ones with the straightest grain, the most lustrous green coating, the precise thickness that nobles and merchants desired for their screens, baskets, and architectural embellishments. This particular morning in early spring, when the plum blossoms had just begun to open their delicate petals and the nightingales sang their first tentative songs, Okina walked along his familiar paths through the bamboo forest. The grove stretched for many cho, each cho being approximately 109 meters, creating a vast maze of towering green columns that swayed and clicked and whispered in even the gentlest breeze. The morning dew still clung to the smooth, segmented stalks, and shafts of golden sunlight pierced through the canopy above, creating an almost sacred atmosphere within the grove. Okina's wife, whom everyone in their small village simply called Okina's wife or sometimes respectfully addressed as Oba, meaning old woman or aunt, had sent him off that morning with his tools as she did every day. They lived in a modest dwelling at the edge of the bamboo forest, a simple structure with a thatched roof and walls made of woven bamboo and plaster. It was a humble home, clean but sparsely furnished, containing little more than sleeping mats, a hearth for cooking, a few cooking vessels, and some simple garments. They had no children, despite years of prayers to the kami, the Shinto deities, and offerings at the local shrine. This childlessness was a source of quiet sorrow that permeated their lives like a persistent autumn rain. As Okina moved deeper into the bamboo forest this morning, something caught his eye, something that had never appeared in all his years of daily harvesting. One particular bamboo stalk, standing slightly apart from its neighbors, emanated a soft, pulsing light, as if the moon itself had descended and taken residence within the hollow chamber of the plant. The glow was gentle yet unmistakable, a luminescence that seemed to breathe with an otherworldly rhythm. The light was neither harsh nor blinding, but rather possessed the quality of early moonlight reflected on still water, mysterious, pure, and impossibly beautiful. Okina approached the glowing bamboo with a mixture of trepidation and wonder. His Buddhist beliefs taught him to be mindful of supernatural occurrences, for they could be blessings from the enlightened beings or tricks from mischievous spirits. His Shinto upbringing had instilled in him a deep reverence for the kami that dwelled in all natural things, in rocks and trees, in mountains and rivers. Surely, he thought, such an extraordinary phenomenon must be a manifestation of divine presence. With trembling hands and a whispered prayer to Kannon, the bodhisattva of compassion, Okina raised his well-worn bamboo cutting knife, a blade he had maintained and sharpened for decades until it could slice through even the toughest bamboo as cleanly as a razor. He positioned the blade at the base of the glowing stalk and, with the practiced motion of a lifetime, made his cut. The bamboo fell with a gentle whisper rather than the usual crack and rustle. As Okina lifted the section and peered into the hollow interior where the light seemed to originate, his breath caught in his throat, and his old heart began to hammer in his chest with the vigor of his youth. There, nestled inside the bamboo chamber as perfectly as a pearl within an oyster, was a tiny infant girl. The child was no larger than Okina's thumb, perhaps 9 centimeters in length from the crown of her perfect little head to the soles of her impossibly tiny feet. She was surrounded by the radiant glow, which seemed to emanate from her very being. Her skin was luminous and perfect, without blemish or mark. Her tiny face bore features of such exquisite beauty that even in miniature, Okina could see she was extraordinary. Her eyes, though closed in peaceful slumber, were framed by delicate lashes. Her miniature hands, each finger perfectly formed down to the tiniest nail, were curled gently near her face. Okina stood frozen for several long moments, scarcely breathing, wondering if his old eyes were deceiving him or if he had somehow fallen asleep among the bamboo and was experiencing a vivid dream. But no, the child was real. As he watched, she stirred slightly, and her tiny mouth moved as if she might soon wake and cry. With infinite care, Okina reached into the bamboo and lifted the miniature infant into his weathered palm. She weighed almost nothing, no more than a sparrow or a silk handkerchief. The divine glow that had filled the bamboo now radiated from his cupped hands. Tears began to stream down Okina's weathered cheeks, carving paths through the dust and leaving dark spots on the front of his simple hemp work robe. "The kami have blessed this old man," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "After so many years of sorrow, after so many nights when my wife wept for the child we could never have, the divine ones have shown their mercy." Carefully cradling the tiny child against his chest, Okina hurried back through the bamboo forest. He moved as quickly as his old legs could carry him without jostling his precious burden, his mind racing with wonder and questions. Who was this child? Why had she appeared in the bamboo? What did the gods intend by placing her in his path? When Okina burst through the door of his modest home, his wife looked up from the hearth where she was preparing their simple morning meal of millet rice and pickled vegetables. She saw immediately that something extraordinary had occurred. Her husband's face was flushed, tears still wet on his cheeks, and his hands were cupped before him as if holding something infinitely precious. "Wife," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with excitement and disbelief. "Come quickly. See what the merciful kami have granted us." The old woman rose and approached her husband, wiping her hands on her worn cotton apron. When Okina slowly opened his hands to reveal the tiny, glowing infant, his wife gasped and brought her own weathered hands to her mouth. For a long moment she could only stare, her eyes wide with astonishment. Is it a child?" she finally managed to whisper. "A daughter," Okina confirmed, his voice filled with reverence. "I found her inside a glowing bamboo stalk as if the moon itself had sent her to us." His wife's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out one trembling finger to gently touch the infant's tiny hand. The baby's impossibly small fingers wrapped around the tip of her finger with surprising strength, and the old woman let out a sob of pure joy. "We must care for her," she said firmly, the tears now flowing freely down her face. "The gods have entrusted her to us. She is our daughter now." They prepared a small basket lined with the softest silk they owned, a precious piece of fabric that had been saved for years, intended to be used for their own burial garments. Now it became a cradle for the divine child. The old woman had enough breast milk to nurse the infant, though her childbearing years were long past. She found to her amazement that milk flowed when the baby suckled, another miracle to add to the growing list. The golden bamboo and growing wealth. The miracles, however, did not end with Kaguya's discovery. When Okina returned to the bamboo grove the following morning, he approached his daily work with new vigor and purpose. He now had a daughter to provide for, and though she was divinely sent, she would still need food, clothing, and eventually a proper home. As he cut the first bamboo stalk of the day, Okina noticed something unusual within the hollow chamber of the plant. There, glinting in the morning light, was a small nugget of pure gold, roughly the size of a plum. He blinked in disbelief, shook his head to clear it, and looked again. The gold remained, solid and real and impossibly present where no gold should be. With shaking hands, Okina retrieved the gold and examined it closely. It was genuine, he was certain of it. The weight, the luster, the slight softness when he pressed his thumbnail against it, all confirmed that he held real gold in his palm. He cut another bamboo stalk. Inside, another piece of gold waited for him. And another. And another. Every bamboo stalk he cut that day contained gold. Some pieces were small, like coins. Others were larger, like the eggs of wild birds. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Okina had collected more wealth than he had earned in his entire life of labor. He loaded the gold into his carrying basket, covered it carefully with bamboo leaves and freshly cut stalks to disguise its contents, and hurried home. This pattern continued day after day, week after week. Each morning, Okina would venture into the bamboo grove, and each bamboo he cut would yield not only valuable material for selling but also precious gold. The old couple was careful not to display their newfound wealth too quickly or obviously. They knew that sudden riches could bring suspicion, jealousy, and unwanted attention from both neighbors and corrupt officials. Instead, they began to improve their circumstances gradually. First, they had their modest home repaired, new thatch for the roof, fresh plaster for the walls, proper wooden flooring to replace the packed earth. Then they purchased better clothing, not ostentatious garments that would attract notice, but well-made robes of good cotton and eventually fine silk in subdued colors appropriate to their age and station. They hired carpenters to expand their home, adding rooms and eventually constructing a proper estate with multiple buildings arranged around a central courtyard, in the style of the minor nobility. They commissioned the creation of a beautiful garden with a small pond, carefully placed rocks, meticulously pruned pine trees, and a bamboo grove of their own, a poetic echo of the forest where their miraculous daughter had been discovered. The old man commissioned fine furniture, lacquered chests for storing clothing and precious items, low writing desks of polished wood, silk cushions for sitting, elegant screens painted with scenes of nature and poetry. They purchased fine ceramic vessels for serving tea and sake, and they began to eat better, rice instead of millet, fresh fish and vegetables, and occasionally even meat, despite Buddhist prohibitions against it. All of this wealth was acquired and displayed gradually, over months and years, so that their neighbors simply assumed that Okina's bamboo business had prospered and that perhaps he had made some wise investments or received an inheritance from a distant relative. Few suspected the truth, that the gods themselves had chosen to shower blessings upon the old couple. But the greatest treasure in the household was not the gold or the fine estate or the beautiful possessions. The greatest treasure was the child who had emerged from the bamboo, the daughter they named Kaguya, Princess Kaguya. The miraculous growth. The infant who had been no larger than a thumb grew with supernatural speed. While a normal child might take years to reach each milestone of development, Kaguya accomplished these transformations in mere months, even weeks. Within the first month of her discovery, the tiny child had grown to the size of a normal newborn infant. She began to make sounds, not the crying and fussing typical of babies, but gentle coos and gurgles that seemed almost musical. The divine glow that had surrounded her when she first appeared gradually dimmed but never entirely disappeared. In certain lights, particularly in the evening or early morning, one could still see a faint luminescence surrounding her, like moonlight made visible. By the end of the second month, Kaguya had reached the size and development of a one-year-old child. She could sit up on her own, and she watched everything around her with eyes that seemed far too wise and aware for such a young being. Her eyes were large and dark, reflecting light with an unusual depth, as if they contained the night sky itself. When she looked at someone, it felt as though she could see into their very soul, understanding things that no infant should comprehend. Okina and his wife were both delighted and slightly unnerved by their daughter's rapid development. They consulted secretly with a local Buddhist priest, a learned man who had studied at the great temples in Nara and who was familiar with ancient texts and legends. The priest listened to their story with grave attention, occasionally nodding as if recognizing elements from old tales. "This child is surely a celestial being," the priest told them, his voice low and serious. They met in his private quarters within the temple compound, where the smell of incense hung heavy in the air and the sound of monks chanting sutras could be heard faintly in the distance. "She may be a manifestation of a bodhisattva, sent to bring blessings to your household and perhaps to accomplish some divine purpose on earth. Care for her well, teach her the ways of our world, but also be prepared. Beings such as this are not destined to remain in our realm forever." This warning cast a shadow over the couple's joy, but they pushed the worry to the backs of their minds. They had been given a daughter, however briefly, and they would cherish every moment with her. By the 3rd month after her discovery, Kaguya had grown to the appearance of a child of 3 or 4 years. She walked gracefully, spoke with perfect clarity and unusual eloquence, and demonstrated an intelligence that astounded everyone who met her. She could recite poetry after hearing it only once, could play simple melodies on the koto, a traditional stringed instrument, after only a brief demonstration, and showed an intuitive understanding of the natural world that seemed to go beyond normal childhood observation. The old woman taught Kaguya all the arts considered essential for a young noblewoman, even though they themselves had been humble commoners until recently. She taught her daughter how to move with grace and dignity, how to arrange flowers in the ikebana tradition, how to conduct the tea ceremony with proper mindfulness and respect. She taught her calligraphy, guiding her small hand as she learned to form the complex characters of written Japanese, both the kanji borrowed from China and the flowing hiragana syllabary that had been developed by Japanese court ladies. Okina, meanwhile, taught Kaguya about the world beyond their estate. He took her on walks through the bamboo forest, showing her the plants and animals, teaching her the names of birds and insects, explaining how the bamboo grew and was harvested. He taught her about the changing seasons, about the agriculture that sustained their region, about the structure of society from the emperor down to the lowest peasant. He told her stories of old, tales of the gods and heroes, of the founding of Japan by the divine Amaterasu, of brave warriors and virtuous ladies. Kaguya absorbed everything with an almost supernatural ease. She seemed to learn not through effort but through some form of innate understanding, as if she was not acquiring new knowledge but rather remembering things she had always known. When she played the koto, her music had a quality that moved listeners to tears. When she wrote poetry, her verses demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of emotion and beauty that even accomplished adult poets might envy. When she arranged flowers, the results possessed a harmony and elegance that seemed to capture some essential truth about the natural world. And always she remained extraordinarily beautiful. As she grew, her beauty increased proportionally, until even as a child she possessed a radiance that made people stop and stare. Her skin remained luminous, as if lit from within. Her hair was impossibly black and lustrous, falling straight and heavy like a silk waterfall when unbound. Her features were perfectly proportioned, delicate yet distinctive, with high cheekbones, a small straight nose, and a mouth that seemed always on the verge of a gentle smile. Her movements had an unconscious grace that made even simple actions like walking or sitting seem like dance. By the end of 3 months, Kaguya had reached full maturity. She appeared to be a young woman of perhaps 15 or 16 years, the perfect age for marriage in the Heian period. Her beauty had become so transcendent that it seemed almost to pain those who looked upon her. People said that gazing at Kaguya was like looking directly at the moon itself, breathtakingly beautiful but somehow also melancholy, possessed of a distant quality that suggested she did not entirely belong to the earthly realm. The old couple marveled at their daughter but also felt a growing sense of unease. The priest's warning echoed in their minds. Beings such as this are not destined to remain in our realm forever. But for now, Kaguya was with them and that was enough. The rumors spread. News of Princess Kaguya's extraordinary beauty could not be contained within the walls of the estate, no matter how carefully the old couple tried to maintain privacy. Servants spoke of her to friends and family in the village. Merchants who delivered goods to the household caught glimpses of her and spread descriptions of her beauty. The priest who had counseled Okina and his wife, despite his discretion, could not help but mention to other learned men that he knew of a most unusual young woman, one who might be of celestial origin. The rumors spread like ripples on water, moving outward from their small village to the nearby towns, then to the larger cities, and eventually reaching the capital city of Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, where the emperor resided and the most powerful noble families maintained their grand mansions. Young men began to appear at the gates of Okina's estate, asking permission to view the famous Princess Kaguya. At first there were only a few, local merchants' sons, minor officials, samurai of modest rank. Okina turned them all away politely but firmly. His daughter was not a curiosity to be gawked at, and he would not parade her before fortune-seekers and braggarts. But the requests kept coming, and the suitors grew more persistent and more prestigious. Soon, young nobles from the capital began making the journey to see the legendary beauty. They would arrive in fine carriages, dressed in their most elegant robes, bearing expensive gifts and letters of introduction from their powerful fathers. They camped outside the estate's gates, some for days or even weeks, hoping for a single glimpse of the princess. Kaguya herself seemed bemused by all the attention. She would sometimes climb to the upper floor of the main house, where a balcony overlooked the front gate, and peek through the slats of the decorative screen to observe the young men below. She saw them in their finery, heard them composing and reciting love poems dedicated to her beauty, watched them engage in various displays meant to demonstrate their worthiness: skilled archery, musical performances, recitations of classical Chinese poetry. "Father," she said one evening as the family sat together in the main room, "why do all these men waste their time outside our gate? They know nothing of me except that I am said to be beautiful. How can they claim to love someone they have never spoken to?" Okina sighed deeply, setting down his cup of tea. The evening light filtered through the paper walls, casting everything in a soft, warm glow. "Beauty, my daughter, is a powerful force in this world. Men are drawn to it as moths are drawn to flame, often with as little thought. They see your beauty as a treasure to be won, a prize that would bring them honor and prestige. But I am not a treasure or a prize," Kaguya replied, a note of steel beneath her gentle tone. "I am a person with my own thoughts and feelings and will." "You are wise beyond your years," the old woman said, reaching over to pat her daughter's hand. "But the world does not always recognize the wisdom or autonomy of women, even women of high birth. Your beauty has made you famous, and fame brings its own burdens." As the months passed, the situation intensified. The suitors grew more numerous and more determined. The estate's gates were never without a crowd of hopeful men, and the neighboring properties began to complain about the disruption. Love letters arrived by the hundreds, some in elegant calligraphy on the finest paper, others more crude and direct. Gifts piled up, bolts of expensive silk, fine ceramics, jewels, rare books, musical instruments, exotic foods and spices from foreign lands. Okina found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As a man who had risen from humble origins to wealth and status, he was not well versed in the complex social protocols of the nobility. He knew that simply continuing to turn away suitors would eventually cause offense to powerful families. Some of these young men were the sons of ministers and advisors to the emperor himself. To insult them too greatly could bring political and social consequences. He consulted with advisors, learned men from the capital whom he had hired to help navigate the complex world of Heian society. They told him that he must allow his daughter to choose a husband, or at the very least, he must establish some formal process for selection. To do otherwise would be seen as arrogance, suggesting that no man was good enough for his daughter. When Okina presented this situation to Kaguya, she listened carefully, her face serene and thoughtful. They sat in the garden, where cherry blossoms were just beginning to fall like snow, carpeting the ground in pale pink petals. "Father," she said finally, "I understand your concern. But I did not ask to be born beautiful, and I do not wish to be married simply because men find me pleasing to look at. If I must have suitors, then let them prove themselves worthy not through displays of wealth or status, but through the accomplishment of truly difficult tasks. Let them demonstrate dedication, courage, and sincerity." Okina stroked his beard thoughtfully. "What kind of tasks do you have in mind, daughter?" Kaguya's expression became distant, as if she were looking at something far away, beyond the garden walls, beyond the earthly realm itself. "I will think on this," she said softly. "But the tasks must be genuinely difficult, nearly impossible in fact. For I sense that it is not yet my time to marry, and perhaps it never will be." This last statement sent a chill through Okina's heart, reminding him once again of the priest's warning. But he nodded his agreement. If his daughter was not ready to marry, then he would support her wishes, regardless of what society might expect. The 5 suitors. From among the dozens of persistent suitors, 5 men eventually distinguished themselves through their unwavering dedication and their impressive credentials. These were not ordinary men but individuals of significant power and prestige in Heian society. Okina, after much deliberation and consultation with his advisors, agreed to grant these 5 an audience with Princess Kaguya, an unprecedented honor that many of the other suitors envied bitterly. The first suitor was Prince Ishitsukuri, a man of royal blood whose family line could be traced back to the divine ancestors of the imperial family itself. He was in his late 20s, tall and imposing, with the refined features common among the nobility. He wore robes of deep purple, a color reserved for the highest ranks of society, and his long black hair was bound up in the style of the court. Prince Ishitsukuri was known for his education and culture. He had studied at the Imperial University, mastered Chinese classical literature, and was an accomplished poet whose verses had been included in the imperial poetry anthologies. He carried himself with the supreme confidence of one who had never been refused anything in his life. The second suitor was Kuramochi no Miko, another prince whose family controlled vast estates in the eastern provinces. He was slightly younger than Ishitsukuri, perhaps 25, with sharper features and a more intense gaze. Where Ishitsukuri projected cultured refinement, Kuramochi projected ambition and determination. He was known as an excellent administrator who had improved the economic conditions of his family's lands. He was also a patron of the arts, maintaining a household of poets, musicians, and scholars. He wore robes of green and gold, embroidered with flying cranes, and he moved with the careful precision of a man who calculated every action. The third suitor was Abe no Myosher, the Right Minister, one of the highest-ranking government officials in the empire, second in power only to the emperor himself in administrative matters. Abe was older than the princes, in his mid-30s, with the slightly weathered look of a man who worked constantly and slept little. His face was intelligent and shrewd, his eyes missing nothing. He had risen to his high position through a combination of political skill, administrative competence, and strategic family alliances. He wore the formal court robes of his office, deep red with intricate patterns of Polonia flowers, the imperial symbol. Unlike the younger suitors, Abe's interest in Kaguya was not merely romantic. He saw the political advantages of marrying a woman whose beauty had become legendary, whose unusual origins suggested divine favor. The fourth suitor was Otomo no Miyuki, the Grand Counselor, an official of rank nearly equal to Abe's. Otomo was in his early 30s, with a handsome face marked by laugh lines around his eyes and mouth, suggesting a more genial personality than his political rival Abe. Indeed, where Abe was known for his cunning and sometimes ruthless efficiency, Otomo had built his career on diplomatic skills, on his ability to mediate disputes and forge alliances. He was widely liked across factional lines and was considered one of the more trustworthy figures in the notoriously treacherous world of court politics. He wore robes of blue and silver, and he approached the situation with what appeared to be genuine good humor and optimism. The fifth and final suitor was Isanokami no Maritari, the middle counselor. He was the youngest of the five, only recently having turned 30, and the lowest in official rank, though his position was still enormously prestigious. Isanokami came from a family of military tradition. His ancestors had been warriors who had served the imperial family in various campaigns and conflicts. He himself was known as a skilled swordsman and horseman, but he had also received an excellent education and served the government in administrative capacities. He was perhaps the most physically imposing of the five suitors, tall and powerfully built, with the bearing of a man equally comfortable in armor or formal robes. He wore garments of brown and gold, practical yet elegant. Unlike some of the others, he approached his courtship of Kaguya with an earnestness that suggested genuine feeling rather than mere ambition. These five men were granted an audience with Princess Kaguya in the main reception hall of the estate. The room had been prepared with meticulous care. Fresh tatami mats covered the floor, their surface woven from soft rushes and edged with decorated silk. Painted screens depicting scenes of bamboo forests and moonlit landscapes were arranged to create a sense of depth and beauty. Incense burned in elegant bronze censers, filling the air with the subtle fragrance of sandalwood. Flower arrangements had been placed in alcoves, simple but perfect compositions that followed the principles of ikebana, speaking to the changing season and the solemnity of the occasion. Kaguya herself sat behind a screen of state, a semi-transparent silk curtain that allowed her to observe the men while maintaining the proper distance and mystery expected of a highborn lady. Even through the screen, her beauty was evident. The graceful line of her posture, the elegant way she held her fan, the luminous quality that seemed to emanate from her very being. Okina and his wife sat to one side, positioned to observe the proceedings. The old man felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. His daughter had agreed to this meeting, but he knew her well enough to suspect that she had her own plans, her own agenda. The elderly couple had learned that for all Kaguya's filial obedience and gentle demeanor, she possessed a will of iron and an intelligence that could not be manipulated or deceived. The five suitors were introduced one by one, each presenting himself and offering formal greetings in the elegant, indirect language of Heian court speech. They spoke of their admiration for the princess's reputation, though they carefully avoided directly mentioning her beauty, as such directness would be considered vulgar. Instead, they used poetic metaphors comparing her to the moon, to cherry blossoms, to rare jewels, to classical beauties from Chinese literature. When the formal introductions were complete, Kaguya spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft yet clear, with a musical quality that made even ordinary words sound like poetry. "Honored gentlemen," she said, "I am deeply grateful for your persistent attention and for the honor you do my family with your interest. However, I must speak plainly about a matter that troubles me. You have come here seeking my hand in marriage, yet not one of you knows anything of my character, my thoughts, my heart. You know only that I am said to be beautiful, and you have seen that reputation confirmed today. But is beauty truly sufficient foundation for a lifetime union?" The suitors exchanged glances. This was not the demure acceptance they had expected. Prince Ishitsukuri cleared his throat and ventured a response. "Princess, beauty such as yours is rare in this world. It is a sign of virtue, of divine favor. Surely it is not wrong to be drawn to such a sign." "Beauty is an accident of birth," Kaguya replied gently but firmly. "It reveals nothing of one's true nature. A beautiful shell may contain nothing of value, while the plainest exterior might conceal the greatest treasures." "Then what would you have us prove, princess?" asked Kuramochi no Miko, leaning forward with interest. "We are willing to demonstrate our worthiness in whatever manner you deem appropriate." Kaguya paused, and in that pause the assembled men could sense something significant was about to occur. When she spoke again, her tone had become more formal, almost ritualistic. In the ancient stories, great heroes proved themselves through the completion of impossible tasks. "If you gentlemen are sincere in your desire to marry me, Then I ask that each of you bring me a treasure, not something that can be purchased with gold, but something rare and precious, something that will require courage, determination, and resourcefulness to obtain. Only then will I be able to judge your true character." The 5 men immediately expressed their willingness to undertake whatever task she might set. Their pride and competitive spirit had been engaged, and none of them was willing to back down or appear less dedicated than his rivals. The impossible task. Kaguya had given this matter considerable thought, consulting ancient texts and legends in her father's growing library. The tasks she was about to assign were not merely difficult. They were nearly impossible, drawn from mythological tales and legendary accounts. Each task was tailored to what she had observed of the individual suitor's personality and strengths. To Prince Ishitsukuri, whose pride lay in his royal lineage and cultured refinement, she said, "I ask that you bring me the stone begging bowl of the Buddha himself. It is said to be kept in a temple in India, made of simple stone yet possessing miraculous properties. A man of your connections and resources should be able to organize an expedition to retrieve such a treasure." The stone-begging bowl of Buddha was an object of legend, said to be the very vessel from which Siddhartha Gautama ate his meals during his enlightenment. According to Buddhist tradition, this simple stone bowl possessed supernatural properties. It could never be filled completely with earthly food, and it radiated a gentle light. The idea that such a treasure could be retrieved and brought to Japan was fantastical, but Ishitsukuri, his pride stung by the challenge, immediately declared his confidence in accomplishing this task. To Kuramochi no Miko, whose ambition and determination were his defining characteristics, she said, "Bring me a branch from the jeweled trees that grow on the floating mountains of Horai. The branch should bear 3 roots made of silver, a trunk of gold, and fruit made of precious white jade. Such a treasure would demonstrate not only your resourcefulness but your willingness to venture into the realm of the divine." The floating mountains of Horai were part of Chinese Taoist mythology, 3 legendary mountains that floated on the back of a giant turtle in the Eastern Sea. These mountains were said to be inhabited by immortals and to contain miraculous treasures, including trees with jeweled leaves and fruit. The very idea of reaching these mythical islands was absurd, but Kuramochi, his competitive nature fully engaged, accepted the challenge without hesitation. To Abe no Myosher, the right minister whose political power came from his vast network of connections and resources, she said, "I ask for the legendary fire rat's robe from China. This garment is said to be woven from the fur of the fire rat, a creature that lives in volcanoes and whose pelt cannot be burned by any flame. Such a robe would be proof of your ability to obtain the rarest treasures through your influence and connections." The fire rat was another legendary creature from Chinese mythology, a rodent that lived in volcanic regions and whose fur was completely impervious to flame. A robe woven from such fur would be an incredibly valuable treasure, and the story of such robes appearing in China was well known, though most scholars believed them to be purely mythical. Abe, confident in his political connections and his ability to leverage resources across vast distances, accepted this challenge with barely concealed satisfaction. To Otomo no Miyuki, the Grand Counselor whose diplomatic skills were legendary, she said, "Bring me the colored jewel from a dragon's neck." Dragons are said to dwell in the depths of the sea, and the greatest of them wear a single perfect jewel at their throat, a gem that contains all colors and radiates divine light. A man of your negotiating skills should be able to convince even a dragon to part with such a treasure. Dragons in East Asian mythology were powerful, intelligent beings associated with water and weather. They were not the evil monsters of European legend but rather wise and often benevolent creatures. However, they were also proud and dangerous, and the jewel said to rest at a dragon's throat was considered one of the most precious treasures in existence. Otomo, always one to appreciate a diplomatic challenge, accepted this task with good humor, though privately he must have wondered how one negotiated with a mythical creature. Finally, to Isanokami no Maritari, the middle counselor whose military background and physical prowess were well known, she said, I ask that you bring me the easy birth charm that belongs to the swallows. It is said that swallows possess a magical shell that ensures safe childbirth, and that they keep this treasure in their nests. A warrior such as yourself should have no difficulty obtaining such an item. This task seemed on the surface to be the easiest of the 5. Swallows were common birds and their nests were accessible. However, the specific magical shell Kaguya described was legendary, and identifying which nest might contain such a treasure, if it existed at all, would prove far more challenging than it initially appeared. Isinokami, perhaps feeling slightly insulted that his task seemed less grand than those assigned to the others, accepted nonetheless, determined to prove himself the first to return with his assigned treasure. The 5 suitors departed from the estate that day full of confidence and determination. Each believed he would be the one to succeed, to win the hand of the most beautiful woman in Japan, and to gain the prestige and status that such a marriage would bring. They did not realize that Princess Kaguya had no intention of marrying any of them, that the tasks had been designed to be impossible, and that she was simply buying time while she figured out her own destiny. The failures. The first to return was Prince Ishitsukuri, and he returned far sooner than anyone expected, a mere 3 months after accepting his challenge. He arrived at the estate gates in a grand procession, with servants carrying an ornate box covered in silk brocade. The prince himself wore an expression of supreme satisfaction as he requested an audience with Princess Kaguya. Okina, surprised but welcoming, arranged for the audience. Once again, the main reception hall was prepared, and once again Kaguya sat behind her screen of state, with her elderly parents positioned nearby. Princess, Ishitsukuri announced grandly, "I have returned from India with the stone-begging bowl of the Buddha himself. The journey was long and arduous, but my determination never wavered. I present this treasure to you as proof of my dedication." He signaled his servants to bring forward the box. With great ceremony, they opened it to reveal a simple stone bowl, dark gray in color, roughly hewn, with a modest size appropriate for holding a single meal. The bowl sat on a cushion of white silk, and even in the dim light of the reception hall, it seemed to possess a certain gravity, a sense of age and significance. Kaguya observed the bowl in silence for a long moment. Then, in her gentle voice, she asked, "Prince Ishitsukuri, this bowl is indeed old and made of stone. But how can we verify that it is truly the Buddha's own begging bowl? What proof can you offer?" Ishitsukuri had anticipated this question. The bowl was obtained from a temple in India where it has been venerated for generations. The priests there provided extensive documentation of its provenance, and they would not part with such a treasure for any price less than the enormous sum I paid. Surely such evidence is sufficient. "May I see this documentation?" Kaguya asked. The prince hesitated, then produced several papers written in what appeared to be Sanskrit, the ancient language of India. "These texts describe the bowl's history and authenticate its origin," he said. Kaguya studied the papers through her screen. After a moment, she said softly, "These documents are very impressive, Prince Ishitsukuri. However, I notice something curious. According to Buddhist tradition, the Buddha's true begging bowl should possess certain miraculous properties. It should be impossible to fill completely with earthly food, and it should radiate a subtle light of its own. This bowl, while certainly old and venerable, seems to possess no such qualities. It appears to be simply a stone bowl, no different from those used by monks throughout Japan." A tense silence filled the room. Ishitsukuri's face flushed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Perhaps the bowl's miraculous properties only manifest under certain conditions, or in the presence of one who has achieved enlightenment," he suggested. "Perhaps," Kaguya agreed. "Or perhaps this is simply an old bowl purchased from a temple in India, or more likely, obtained from a temple here in Japan, and presented as something it is not. I appreciate your efforts, Prince Ishitsukuri, but I cannot accept this as the genuine article." The prince's facade of confidence crumbled. He stood frozen for a moment, humiliated before his rivals and in front of the woman he sought to impress. Then, without another word, he bowed stiffly and left, his servants scrambling to follow with their rejected treasure. It was later discovered that Ishitsukuri had never left the capital at all. He had spent the 3 months searching for a suitable old bowl, finally purchasing one from a small temple and fabricating the story of his journey to India. The false documents had been created by a skilled forger he'd hired. His deception exposed, Prince Ishitsukuri became a figure of mockery in court circles, and he eventually withdrew from society, taking Buddhist vows and retiring to a remote monastery, where he spent the rest of his days in genuine spiritual practice, perhaps seeking in truth what he had once tried to counterfeit. The craftsman's deception. The second to attempt his task was Kuramochi no Miko, who disappeared for more than a year. During this time, rumors circulated about his whereabouts. Some said he had sailed to China and beyond, seeking the mythical floating mountains of Horai. Others claimed he had been lost at sea. Still others suggested he had abandoned his quest and was living in self-imposed exile, too ashamed to admit failure. Then, one spring morning when cherry blossoms filled the air like snow, Kuramochi no Miko appeared at the estate gates. He looked weathered and worn, his face tanned by sun and wind, his hands calloused, his formal robes replaced by simpler traveling garments. He carried a wrapped bundle with obvious care, and his eyes held a mix of triumph and exhaustion. The audience was arranged and Kuramochi presented his treasure. When the wrappings were removed, everyone in the room gasped. There, resting on silk, was an exquisite branch approximately 2 feet in length. The roots, 3 of them, twisted and organic in form, were made of pure silver that gleamed softly in the light. The trunk was crafted from gold, beaten thin and formed into a shape that mimicked the natural texture of bark. And from this golden trunk grew delicate leaves and fruit carved from white jade so pure and translucent that it seemed to glow from within. The craftsmanship was absolutely extraordinary, perhaps the finest work of metalcraft and jewelry making anyone present had ever seen. "Princess Kaguya," Kuramochi said, his voice rough from disuse, "I have returned from Horai with the jeweled branch you requested. The journey was more perilous than I can express. I sailed east from China into waters where no maps guided us, where storms threatened to destroy our ship daily. Finally, when all seemed lost, the mists parted, and we saw the floating mountains, rising from the sea on the back of a great turtle as the legends describe. Climbing the mountains was treacherous, and my companions and I faced dangers I dare not speak of. But eventually I found the jeweled trees and obtained this branch. I present it to you as proof of my determination and courage." Kaguya examined the branch carefully through her screen. It was indeed beautiful, a masterwork that would be the pride of any treasury. She reached through the screen to touch it gently, her fingers tracing the silver roots, the gold trunk, the jade leaves. "This is truly magnificent craftsmanship," she said finally. "The artisan who created this was a master beyond compare." Kuramochi frowned slightly. "Artisan, princess? This branch was not crafted by human hands. It grew naturally on the divine trees of Horai, exactly as the legends describe." At that moment, a commotion arose outside the reception hall. Voices were raised in argument, and then the doors slid open to reveal a group of 6 men, all dressed in the simple clothing of craftsmen and workers. They were led by an older man with strong, skilled hands and eyes that burned with anger. "Forgive this intrusion," the old craftsman said, bowing to Okina but not to Kuramochi, "but I and my fellow artisans must speak. That branch, the one your daughter is examining, we made it. Prince Kuramochi commissioned us more than a year ago to create a jeweled branch exactly as Princess Kaguya had described. We worked day and night for 16 months. We are the finest metal workers, jewelers, and stone carvers in the capital, and we poured all our skill into this project, creating what we believe to be the finest work of our lives." The old craftsman's voice grew harder. We were promised payment upon completion, a sum sufficient to support our families for years. But when we delivered the branch to Prince Kuramochi, he claimed he was not satisfied with our work and refused to pay more than a fraction of what he'd promised. Now we discover he has presented our creation as a genuine treasure from Horai, intending to deceive Princess Kaguya into marriage. Kuramochi's face went white, then red. These men are lying. They are merely trying to extort money from me by disrupting my... We have the receipts for the materials, another craftsman interrupted, producing papers from his sleeve. Silver purchased from the merchants. Gold from the imperial suppliers. Jade imported from China. All documented and traceable. We also have the preliminary sketches Prince Kuramochi provided, showing exactly what he wanted us to create, based on Princess Kaguya's description. Kaguya set down the branch gently. Prince Kuramochi, she said, her voice still soft but carrying an edge of steel, is what these men say true? For a long moment the prince said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. The floating mountains of Horai cannot be found, he said quietly. I searched. I truly did search. I commissioned ships and sailed east from China, but there was nothing but empty ocean. After months of fruitless searching, I realized the task was impossible. But I could not bear to return empty-handed, to admit defeat, to lose you to one of my rivals. So I conceived another plan. If the genuine article could not be obtained, why not create something so perfect that it might as well be real? Because a beautiful lie is still a lie, Kaguya replied. And because in crafting your deception, you have cheated these honest craftsmen of their rightful payment. Okina, who had been sitting quietly throughout this exchange, now spoke up. Prince Kuramochi, you will pay these men what they are owed with interest for the delay. And then you will leave this estate and not return. Kuramochi had no choice but to comply. He paid the craftsmen their full fee, a sum so large it significantly depleted his personal fortune. The artisans left satisfied, and the magnificent jeweled branch, that masterwork of human skill and creativity, went with them, for Kaguya refused to keep an object created through deception and injustice. Prince Kuramochi departed in disgrace. The story of his attempted fraud spread rapidly through the capital, and he became a subject of mockery and contempt. His political influence waned, and he eventually lost his position and properties, dying some years later in relative poverty, a cautionary tale about the consequences of deception. The false robe. Abe no Myosher, the right minister, disappeared for nearly 2 years. Given his high position and numerous responsibilities, his prolonged absence from the capital caused considerable disruption in the government. Other officials had to assume his duties, and rumors swirled about whether he had abandoned his post, suffered some mishap, or was genuinely pursuing the impossible task Princess Kaguya had set for him. When he finally returned, it was with tremendous fanfare. He arrived at the estate in a grand procession that included dozens of servants, musicians, and even some minor officials from the court. He was dressed in his most formal robes of office, and he carried before him a lacquered box inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a container worthy of the greatest treasure. The audience was arranged with even more ceremony than the previous occasions, for Abe was the highest-ranking official yet to return. When everyone was assembled, he spoke in the formal, elaborate language of high court discourse. Honorable Okina, respected wife, and most especially Princess Kaguya, I have returned from a journey that has taken me to the far reaches of China and beyond. I have employed all my resources, called upon every connection and obligation accumulated through decades of service, and mobilized vast wealth toward a single purpose, obtaining the fire rat's robe that Princess Kaguya requested. He signaled for the box to be brought forward and opened. Inside, nestled on white silk, was a robe of the most unusual appearance. The fabric, if it could be called fabric, had a silvery gray sheen and seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The texture appeared somewhere between fur and something more metallic, almost like fine wire woven together. The robe was tailored in the Chinese style, with wide sleeves and elegant lines. This robe, Abe continued, was obtained at great expense from a merchant in the far western regions of China, near the borders of the desert lands. The merchant's family had possessed it for generations, and they claimed it came originally from the volcanic mountains where the fire rats dwell. To prove its authenticity, they demonstrated its miraculous property before I would purchase it. The robe cannot be burned by any fire. A bold claim, Okina observed. And did you witness this demonstration yourself? I did, Abe confirmed. The merchant held a corner of the robe in an open flame, and it remained completely unharmed. Not even the smell of singed fabric appeared. It was truly miraculous. Kaguya studied the robe from behind her screen. Minister Abe, your dedication and resourcefulness are impressive. However, before I can accept this treasure, I must verify its properties myself. Would you object to a test? Not at all, Abe replied confidently. In fact, I would welcome such a test so that all doubts might be dispelled. Servants brought a bronze brazier filled with burning charcoal. The flames were strong and hot, sufficient to ignite any normal fabric instantly. At Kaguya's direction, a corner of the robe was held over the flames. For a moment, nothing happened. The robe seemed indeed to resist the fire's touch. Abe's expression grew triumphant, and some of the assembled servants and officials began to murmur in amazement. But then a wisp of smoke appeared. The silvery gray material began to brown and curl at the edges. A moment later, it burst into flame, burning with a bright orange fire and giving off a terrible smell, the unmistakable odor of burning fur. Abe's face went from triumph to confusion to horror in the span of a few heartbeats. But this is impossible. The merchant demonstrated it in my presence. I saw the robe resist fire. Kaguya's voice remained calm and gentle. I suspect, Minister Abe, that you saw exactly what the merchant intended you to see. Perhaps he treated a small portion of the garment with some substance that makes it temporarily fire-resistant. There are such compounds known to alchemists. Or perhaps he performed a sleight of hand, substituting another piece of material for the demonstration. In any case, what burns before us now is clearly not the legendary fire rat's robe, but rather some normal fur, perhaps from a chinchilla or similar creature, that has been dyed and treated to appear unusual. The robe continued to burn in the brazier, filling the room with acrid smoke until servants moved it outside. Abe stood frozen, his mind clearly racing to comprehend how he had been deceived. He had spent vast sums of money, possibly bankrupting himself, for a fraud. I have been made a fool, he said finally, his voice hollow. I apologize for wasting your time, Princess, and for my failure to see through this deception. The fault lies with those who deceived you, Kaguya replied, and perhaps with the assumption that any task could be accomplished through money and connections alone. Some things simply cannot be bought or obtained through political influence. Abe no Myosher departed the estate a broken man. The financial cost of his fruitless quest, combined with the humiliation of having been deceived and the loss of prestige from his extended absence from court, destroyed his political career. He resigned his position as Right Minister and retired from public life. The story of the false fire rat's robe became another cautionary tale told in the capital. The Dragon's Wrath. Otomo no Miyuki, the Grand Counselor, took a different approach to his impossible task. Rather than disappearing for years or attempting to purchase or fabricate the treasure he sought, he instead mounted a proper expedition. He commissioned the construction of a sturdy ship, hired experienced sailors, and recruited men skilled in diving and underwater exploration. He reasoned that if dragons dwelt in the depths of the sea, then the way to obtain the jewel from a dragon's neck was to venture into those depths and negotiate, or if necessary do battle. His expedition set sail from the port of Naniwa, modern-day Osaka, on a clear spring morning. The ship was well provisioned, and the crew was experienced in navigating the dangerous waters around Japan. Otomo himself came aboard dressed in practical clothing rather than his formal robes, determined to be an active participant in this quest rather than merely its sponsor. 4 weeks, they sailed along the coast and then out into the open ocean, searching for any sign of the dragons that legend claimed inhabited the depths. They spoke with fishermen in various ports, collecting stories of unusual sightings and strange occurrences at sea. Some old fishermen claimed to have seen serpentine forms breaking the surface of the water on foggy mornings. Others spoke of underwater lights and sounds that suggested something large and mysterious dwelling in the deep trenches and underwater valleys. Eventually, they anchored near a place where several fishermen had reported seeing strange phenomena, an area where the sea was particularly deep and where unusual currents swirled and eddied in patterns that defied easy explanation. Otomo gathered his best divers and explained his plan. They would descend with weighted ropes as far as they could go, searching for any sign of a dragon's lair. The first few dives revealed nothing but increasingly dark and cold water, with strange deep-sea fish and formations of rock and coral. But on the 4th dive, one of the divers surfaced in a state of terrified excitement, claiming he had seen something massive moving in the depths, a form too large to be any normal creature, with scales that glinted despite the dimness, and eyes that glowed with their own light. Otomo, his diplomatic nature and curiosity overcoming his fear, decided he would make the next dive himself. He had a weighted rope attached to his waist and took several deep breaths to prepare his lungs before plunging beneath the surface. The water was cold, growing colder as he descended. The light faded quickly, the bright surface world becoming a distant memory as the deep ocean's darkness enveloped him. His lungs began to burn and pressure built in his ears and chest. Just when he thought he must surface or drown, he saw it. Far below him, larger than any whale, was a creature of impossible majesty. Its body was long and serpentine, covered in scales that seemed to contain the colors of the entire ocean. Deep blues and greens, touches of silver and gold, hints of purple in the shadows. The creature's head was massive, with intelligent eyes the size of dinner plates that glowed with a soft golden light. And there, at its throat, suspended by no visible means, was a jewel, a perfect sphere about the size of a man's fist, pulsing with iridescent color that shifted and changed moment by moment. The dragon, for it could be nothing else, turned its enormous head to look directly at Otomo. The man felt a presence in his mind, not words exactly, but a communication nonetheless. The dragon was ancient and wise, and it was not pleased to be disturbed by this intrusion into its domain. Otomo's lungs were screaming for air, his vision beginning to dim at the edges. He had only moments before he would have to surface or die. In that desperate instant, he tried to project a thought toward the dragon, a plea for the jewel and an explanation of why he sought it. The response was immediate and terrifying. The dragon's mind touched his with a force that felt like a physical blow. Images flashed through Otomo's consciousness, the dragon's perspective of time spanning centuries, of the insignificance of human affairs, of the arrogance of presuming one could simply take what belonged to a being of such power. And then came a simple, clear message: leave or die. Otomo felt the rope around his waist being pulled by his crew above, who had seen bubbles stop rising and feared for his life. As he was drawn rapidly upward, his last sight of the dragon was of the great creature turning away, dismissing him as unworthy of further attention. He broke the surface gasping and choking, his crew hauling him aboard and pounding his back as he coughed up seawater. When he could finally speak, he ordered them to raise anchor and return to port immediately. The voyage back was harrowing. The previously calm seas became violent, with waves that threatened to capsize their ship and winds that seemed to blow from all directions at once. Rain lashed them with unusual ferocity, and lightning struck close enough to splinter part of the mast. The crew, superstitious sailors all, muttered that the dragon was pursuing them, angry at their intrusion and determined to prevent their escape. One particularly massive wave struck the ship broadside, and Otomo was swept overboard. He found himself in the churning water, being pulled down by the weight of his clothes and his exhaustion. As darkness began to claim him, he thought he saw, far below, a golden light, the dragon's eyes watching his death with cold indifference. But then he was at the surface again, coughing and gasping. Hands gripped him. His crew had thrown ropes and managed to pull him back aboard. The storm finally began to abate, and they limped back to port with their damaged ship, grateful to have survived. Otomo recovered from his physical injuries, but the experience had changed him. When he finally returned to the capital and to Princess Kaguya's estate, he did not attempt to fabricate a story or present a false treasure. Instead, he came before her and spoke truthfully. "Princess Kaguya," he said, his voice humble and lacking its usual confidence, "I have failed in the task you set me. I found the dragon and I saw the jewel you described. But I learned something in that encounter. Some treasures are not meant for human possession, no matter how noble the purpose. The dragon's jewel has been at its throat for centuries beyond counting, and it will remain there for centuries more. To take it would be an act of supreme arrogance, an offense against the natural order. I cannot and will not complete this task, even if it means losing all chance of winning your hand." Kaguya's response was gentle and, perhaps, held a note of approval that had been absent in her interactions with the previous suitors. "Grand Counselor Otomo, you have shown wisdom that the others lacked. You attempted your task genuinely and honestly, and when you realized its true nature, you had the integrity to admit failure rather than attempting deception. This speaks well of your character, even though you return without the treasure I requested." Otomo bowed deeply. "Then I take my leave, Princess, with my honor intact if not my pride. I wish you well in your future, whatever form it may take." He departed the estate and returned to the capital, where he resumed his duties as Grand Counselor. Unlike the other failed suitors, he suffered no loss of position or reputation. Indeed, those who heard his honest account of the attempted task and his ultimate decision not to persist in disturbing the dragon regarded him with increased respect. He never married, and he never forgot the beautiful princess whose impossible task had led him to wisdom. The Swallow's Nest. The last of the 5 suitors, Isinokami no Maritari, approached his task with the methodical determination of a warrior. The easy birth charm from a swallow's nest seemed, at first, to be the most achievable of all the impossible tasks. Swallows were common birds throughout Japan, and their nests were everywhere, under the eaves of houses, in barn rafters, in the overhangs of temples and shrines. Isinokami spent weeks researching swallows, consulting with scholars and reading every text he could find about birds and their behavior. He learned that swallows were considered auspicious birds, associated with good fortune and safe returns. The legend of the easy birth charm suggested that swallows, who laid multiple eggs each year and successfully raised many clutches of young, possessed some magical talisman that ensured this reproductive success. His research suggested that if such a charm existed, it would most likely be found in the oldest, most established swallow nests, passed down from generation to generation as each year's fledglings returned to nest in the same location as their parents. He identified several ancient temples and shrines where swallows had nested for decades or even centuries. The most promising location was an old temple in the mountains, dedicated to Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion. The temple's abbot informed Isinokami that swallows had nested in the main hall's rafters for as long as anyone could remember, certainly for more than 100 years. Each spring they returned from their winter migration and rebuilt or repaired their mud nests in exactly the same spots. Isinokami obtained permission from the abbot to search the nests, though the old monk warned him that disturbing the birds might anger the spirits that protected the temple. The warrior dismissed this concern, confident in his physical abilities and his determination. He waited until the swallows had completed their nesting and laid their eggs but before the young had hatched, reasoning that the birds would be least likely to abandon their nests at this stage. Then one morning he brought a tall ladder and began his search. The main hall's rafters were high, at least 30 feet above the wooden floor. The swallow nests were clustered among the massive beams that supported the temple's heavy tiled roof. Isanokami climbed carefully, his warrior's balance and strength serving him well. He reached the first nest and carefully examined its contents. 3 small speckled eggs resting in a cup of mud and grass. No magical shell, no obvious charm or talisman. He moved to the next nest and the next, climbing among the rafters, disturbing the swallows, who flew around him in increasing agitation, their sharp cries echoing in the temple's vast space. Still he found nothing but normal nests with normal eggs. Hours passed. Isanokami's arms and legs began to tire from the awkward climbing and balancing. The swallows' agitation increased to a frenzy. They began to dive at him, their sharp beaks striking his face and hands, drawing blood. Finally, he reached the oldest nest, positioned in the very peak of the temple roof where the main beams crossed. This nest was larger than the others, built up over many seasons until it was almost a foot across. Isanokami wedged himself carefully into position and reached into the nest, his fingers probing among the mud and straw and feathers. And then he felt it, something hard and smooth, not like an egg but like a small shell or stone, buried deep in the structure of the nest. His heart leapt with excitement. This must be it. The legendary charm that ensured easy birth for the swallows. He gripped the object and tried to pull it free, but it was wedged firmly into the nest structure. He pulled harder, yanking at it with increasing force. The object suddenly came loose, but the violent motion unbalanced him. His foot slipped on the beam. For one heart-stopping moment, Isanokami teetered on the edge of the rafter, his arms windmilling as he tried to regain his balance. Then he fell. The fall was only 30 feet, but it was more than enough. He struck the wooden floor with tremendous force, landing badly on his hip and side. The object he had pulled from the nest flew from his hand and skittered across the polished floor. Pain exploded through his body. He felt, something break inside him, a wet, terrible snapping sensation accompanied by a grinding shock. He couldn't breathe. The world dimmed and swam around him. Monks came running, the abbot's warnings about disturbing the sacred birds seemingly confirmed by this disaster. They carefully lifted the fallen warrior and carried him to a room where he could be tended. A doctor was summoned, a skilled physician who examined Isanokami's injuries and slowly shook his head. "The hip is broken and there is internal damage," the doctor reported grimly. "He may live, but he will likely never walk properly again. And there is something else, I believe his back is damaged. Even if he survives, he may be paralyzed." The abbot, showing compassion despite his earlier warnings having been ignored, ordered that Isanokami be cared for in the temple for as long as necessary. The monks tended him with great skill and patience. Meanwhile, one of them retrieved the object that Isanokami had pulled from the nest. It was not a magical charm. It was simply an old cowrie shell, likely brought to the nest by some long-ago swallow as part of the nest's construction material. There was nothing supernatural about it, nothing that would ensure easy childbirth, nothing but a common shell that had been incorporated into the mud and grass structure over the years. When Isanokami was finally well enough to receive visitors, messengers brought him news from Princess Kaguya. She had heard of his accident and his injuries, and she expressed sincere regret that her impossible task had led to his harm. "Please inform the middle counselor," her message said, "that he need not continue searching for the swallow's charm. His determination and courage have been adequately demonstrated, even though they led to misfortune. I release him from his quest and wish him a full recovery." But recovery in the fullest sense never came. Isanokami survived his injuries, but the doctor's grim prognosis proved accurate. He lost the use of his legs and spent the rest of his life in a wheeled chair, pushed by servants. His career as a warrior and administrator effectively ended. He lived for many more years, eventually finding a kind of peace in poetry and Buddhist study, but he never forgot the beautiful princess whose impossible task had cost him his mobility and his former life. The emperor's interest. With all 5 suitors failed or departed, life at the estate returned to a semblance of normalcy, though of course nothing could truly be normal anymore. Princess Kaguya's beauty and the legendary impossible tasks had become the most famous story in all of Japan. The tale was told and retold, elaborated upon and turned into poems and songs. Kaguya had become something more than a person. She had become a legend, a symbol, an impossible ideal. It was inevitable that the story would eventually reach the emperor himself. The emperor during this period, whose personal name would have been known only to his closest intimates, as he was referred to by title and indirect reference, was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s. He had inherited the throne as a child and had been raised within the rigid protocols of the imperial court, surrounded by ceremony and formality, with nearly every moment of his life dictated by tradition and the needs of state. Yet despite his exalted position, or perhaps because of it, he was lonely. The women of the court were available to him, certainly, but they approached him with either calculating ambition or fearful deference. None treated him as a human being. All saw only the emperor, the divine descendant of Amaterasu, the figure of ultimate authority. When he heard the story of Princess Kaguya, a woman of such extraordinary beauty that she had rejected 5 of the most powerful and eligible men in the realm, setting them impossible tasks that exposed their deception or cost them dearly, his interest was piqued. Here was someone who apparently could not be bought, impressed by status or swayed by power. Here was perhaps the one person in all of Japan who might see him as more than just his title. The emperor announced his intention to visit the estate of Take Torai no Okina to view the legendary Princess Kaguya for himself. This announcement sent the old couple into a state of near panic. An imperial visit required elaborate preparations. The estate must be made perfect. Appropriate gifts must be arranged. The correct protocols must be followed precisely. Any error, any perceived slight or impropriety, could result in disgrace or worse. But more worrying to the old couple was Kaguya's reaction. Their daughter, when informed of the impending imperial visit, simply nodded calmly and said, "I see. Then I suppose I have no choice but to receive him." There was something in her tone, a resignation mixed with sadness, that troubled Okina deeply. He had noticed changes in his daughter lately, a growing melancholy, a tendency to stand in the garden in the evening and gaze up at the moon with an expression of profound longing. Sometimes, when she thought no one was observing her, tears would roll down her cheeks as she looked at the silver orb in the sky. The emperor arrived on a clear autumn day when the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. He came with a modest entourage by imperial standards, only a few dozen courtiers and guards, and he wore relatively simple robes, apparently hoping to create a less formal atmosphere than his official appearances required. Okina and his wife greeted the emperor with the deepest possible bows, their foreheads nearly touching the ground. The emperor gestured for them to rise and spoke to them with surprising gentleness and courtesy, putting them somewhat at ease. "I have come to meet your daughter," he said simply. "I have heard that she is not only beautiful but wise and strong-willed. These are qualities I admire. I would speak with her if she is willing." The meeting was arranged in the estate's finest room, which had been specially prepared for this occasion. Unlike the previous suitors, the emperor did not accept the barrier of a screen between himself and Kaguya. His status was such that he could make demands others could not. And Kaguya, recognizing that one does not refuse the emperor, agreed to appear before him directly. When she entered the room and the emperor saw her for the first time, he understood immediately why poets and storytellers had struggled to describe her adequately. No words could truly capture the quality of her presence. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She possessed a luminosity, a sense of existing slightly apart from the normal world, as if she were a being from a scroll painting come to life. They spoke for hours, with Okina and his wife and the imperial courtiers maintaining a respectful distance. The emperor, freed momentarily from the rigid formality of court protocol, spoke more openly than he had perhaps ever spoken in his life. He talked about the loneliness of his position, about the burden of having every word and action scrutinized and recorded for history, about his desire to know if he was truly respected for himself or merely feared and obeyed because of his position. Kaguya listened with genuine attention and responded with both kindness and honesty. "Your Majesty," she said at one point, "I believe you are a good person who tries to rule justly. But it is impossible for someone in your position to have normal relationships with others. The power imbalance is too great. Even in this conversation, you know and I know that you could order me to do nearly anything, and I would have no choice but to comply. How can there be genuine connection when that reality underlies every interaction?" The emperor considered this thoughtfully. "You are right, of course. And yet, paradoxically, your very willingness to speak this truth to me is what makes me value your perspective. No one else at court would dare to be so direct with me." As the day wore on, the emperor found himself increasingly drawn to Kaguya. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, forthright without being disrespectful, intelligent without being pretentious, beautiful without being vain. When evening approached and the moon began to rise in the darkening sky, he made his intentions clear. "Princess Kaguya," he said formally, "I wish you to return with me to the capital. I would make you one of my consorts, with all the honor and privileges that entails. You would want for nothing and you would have influence in the court second to none." Kaguya stood and walked to the open screen that overlooked the garden. The moon was rising, large and luminous, painting everything in silver light. When she spoke, her voice was soft and filled with a sorrow that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. "Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by your offer. But I must decline. I cannot become your consort, cannot go to the capital, cannot be part of your world." The emperor's face showed surprise and, perhaps, the first real refusal he had experienced in his life. "Cannot? Or will not?" "Cannot," Kaguya replied, still gazing at the moon. I am not what I appear to be, your Majesty. I am not truly of this world. The time is approaching when I will have to leave, when I will return to the place I came from. To accept your offer would be a cruelty to both of us, for I would have to abandon you just as you came to care for me." "I don't understand," the emperor said, rising and approaching her. "What do you mean you're not of this world? Where would you go? You're standing here before me as real as anything I've ever known." Kaguya turned to face him, and in the moonlight, the faint luminescence that always surrounded her became more visible, more obvious. "I come from the moon, your Majesty. I was sent to Earth as a punishment for some transgression in my previous existence. I was placed in the bamboo as an infant, to live a human life and experience human joys and sorrows. But my time here is limited. When the next full moon comes, the harvest moon of the 8th month, those from the Moon Kingdom will come to retrieve me, and I will have no choice but to return with them." The emperor stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally a kind of desperate understanding. "Then we have time. If the harvest moon of the 8th month is still weeks away, then stay with me until then. Let me know you, truly know you, for whatever time remains." Kaguya shook her head gently. "Your Majesty, that would only make the parting more painful. For both of us. And once I return to the moon, my memories of Earth will be erased. I will not remember you, will not remember this conversation or these feelings. It is the way of the moon people. We are not permitted to carry attachments from one existence to another." For a long moment, the emperor said nothing. Then, showing wisdom beyond his years, he nodded slowly. "I understand. And I will not force you to do anything against your will. But I ask one thing. When the time comes for you to depart, allow me to be present. Allow me to witness this impossible thing, and to say farewell properly." "That I can promise," Kaguya replied, her eyes bright with tears that caught the moonlight like captured stars. The emperor departed the estate that night, and though he returned to the capital and continued his duties, those close to him noticed a change in his demeanor. He seemed both more thoughtful and more melancholy, as if he had glimpsed something profound and beautiful that could never be his. The final days. After the emperor's visit, Kaguya's melancholy deepened. She spent her days preparing for what was to come, though she could not fully explain to her elderly parents what that would entail. Okina and his wife, who loved their daughter with all their hearts, were in agony. They had found her in the bamboo, had raised her through her miraculous childhood, had watched her grow into a woman of incomparable beauty and wisdom. The thought of losing her was unbearable. "There must be something we can do," Okina said one evening as the three of them sat together in the garden. The autumn flowers were in bloom, chrysanthemums in white and gold, their petals perfect and their fragrance subtle on the cool air. "We could hide you. We could move to a distant province. We could." "Father," Kaguya interrupted gently, "there is nowhere on earth I could hide from those who are coming. They will find me no matter where I go. This has always been my fate. I have known it since the beginning, though I tried to forget, tried to pretend I could remain here forever." "Why?" the old woman asked, her voice breaking. "Why did the gods give you to us only to take you away? It seems cruel beyond measure." "Not cruel," Kaguya replied, reaching out to take her mother's weathered hand. "I was sent here to learn what it means to be human, to experience attachment and love, joy and sorrow. And I have learned those things perhaps too well. I will leave here carrying not memories, those will be taken from me, but I believe I will carry something deeper, some impression on my eternal soul of what it meant to be your daughter, to be loved and to love in return." The old couple wept, and Kaguya wept with them, the three of them holding each other as the moon rose higher in the sky, as if watching their grief with cold, distant interest. As the 8th month approached and the moon grew toward fullness, strange signs began to appear. At night, the bamboo forest would glow with a soft light, as if filled with countless fireflies. Musical sounds could be heard in the darkness, not earthly instruments but something more ethereal, like wind chimes made of crystal and starlight. The very air seemed to shimmer around the estate, as if reality was becoming thin, ready to tear open like rice paper. Kaguya made her preparations. She wrote letters to those she had known, kind words for each of the 5 suitors who had attempted her impossible tasks, expressions of regret for the pain or humiliation they had endured. She wrote to the emperor, thanking him for seeing her as a person rather than merely a prize to be won, and wishing him wisdom and compassion in his long reign. She spent time with her parents, trying to memorize their faces, their voices, the way her father's hands were gnarled from his years of labor, the way her mother's eyes crinkled when she smiled. She walked through the estate, touching the walls and screens and furniture, trying to commit everything to memory even though she knew it was futile. When the emperor learned that the time was approaching, he sent a company of his finest warriors to the estate, with instructions to prevent the celestial beings from taking Princess Kaguya. If this was truly to happen, he reasoned, then he would use every power at his disposal to stop it. The warriors were skilled men, experienced in combat, carrying the finest weapons. They took up positions around the estate and on the roof, their bows ready, their swords drawn. Okina and his wife clung to hope when they saw the imperial warriors. Perhaps force could succeed where pleading had failed. Perhaps the moon people could be fought off, driven away, convinced to leave their daughter in peace. But Kaguya knew better. "Their efforts will be in vain," she told her parents sadly. "The moon people exist in a different realm, operating by rules different from those of Earth. Earthly weapons cannot harm them, and earthly force cannot prevent them from claiming what is theirs." The night of the full moon arrived, the harvest moon, the brightest and most beautiful moon of the year. It rose over the mountains like a great silver disk, so bright that it cast distinct shadows, so large that it seemed close enough to touch. As midnight approached, the strange signs that had been appearing around the estate intensified. The air began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The music grew louder, more complex, filled with harmonies that seemed to have more notes than earthly instruments could produce. A wind arose, though the trees did not move, a wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then they came. A procession descended from the sky, moving down on beams of moonlight as if they were solid paths. The beings who came were humanoid in shape but clearly not human. They were taller than any earthly person, with perfectly proportioned features and a luminosity that made them difficult to look at directly. They wore robes that seemed to be woven from light itself, shimmering and shifting through colors that had no earthly names. They moved with a grace that made them appear to be floating rather than walking, and they made no sound except for the ethereal music that surrounded them. The imperial warriors, brave men all, tried to fulfill their duty. They loosed arrows at the descending figures. But the arrows in mid-flight simply stopped. They hung suspended in the air as if time itself had frozen, then fell harmlessly to the ground. The warriors raised their swords and shouted challenges, but the moon people paid them no attention, passing through their defensive lines as if the warriors were shadows, insubstantial and irrelevant. The leader of the moon people, a being of such intense radiance that looking at them was like looking at a star, approached the main building where Kaguya waited with her parents. The being spoke, and its voice was neither male nor female but something other, resonating in a way that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind. Kaguya, one who was sent to Earth as consequence and teaching, your time of exile has concluded. Your lessons have been learned. It is time to return to your true home, to the kingdom of the moon where you belong. Kaguya stood, and for a moment she looked at her parents, the old man and woman who had found her in the bamboo, who had raised her with love and care, who had given her a human life. Tears streamed down all their faces. Please, Okina begged, falling to his knees before the radiant being. Please let her stay. She is our daughter, our only child. We have nothing without her. Take my life instead, take anything, but let her remain with us. The moon being regarded the old man with something that might have been pity, though its alien features were difficult to read. The laws of the moon kingdom cannot be changed for individual desire, no matter how pure. Kaguya was sent to Earth for a time, and that time has now ended. This is the nature of existence. Nothing remains forever, all things must change and pass. Your daughter has touched your lives and been touched by them in return. That is precious, even if temporary. Two attendants came forward carrying a small chest and a robe. The chest, they explained, contained the elixir of life, a gift from the moon kingdom to Kaguya's earthly parents, compensation for their loss. One sip would grant hundreds of years of life, free from sickness and the pains of aging. The robe they carried was made of feathers, not earthly feathers, but something finer and more delicate, each filament seeming to contain starlight. This was the robe of feathers, and when worn, it would restore Kaguya to her true nature as a moon being. It would also erase her earthly memories, removing all trace of her time in the human world, all recollection of joy and sorrow, all memory of the old couple who had been her parents. Wait, Kaguya said, holding up a hand. Before I wear the robe, before my memories are erased, please allow me a few final moments. The moon being inclined its head in agreement. Time, it seemed, meant something different to the moon people, and they could afford to be patient. Kaguya turned to her parents and embraced them, holding them with all her strength, trying to memorize the feel of them, the scent of them, the reality of their presence. Mother, father, she whispered, I will forget you when I put on that robe. But know this, being your daughter has been the greatest joy of my existence. If I had a choice, I would choose to remain with you forever. But that choice is not mine to make. She stepped back and picked up her writing brush and ink. Moving quickly, she composed a final poem, a short verse in the classical style, capturing her feelings in the moment. Now I must leave. The mountain peaks I learned to love. Yet still I wish to leave some trace, this fragile poem, brushed beneath an autumn moon. She gave the poem to her mother, who clutched it as if it were the most precious treasure in existence. Then Kaguya turned to face the moon people, standing straight and dignified despite the tears that continued to flow down her face. The attendants approached with the robe of feathers. As they placed it around her shoulders, a visible change began to occur. The robe settled onto her shoulders like mist, weightless yet tangible. As it touched her, Kaguya's expression began to change. The sorrow and love that had animated her features gradually faded, replaced by something more serene but also more distant. Her tears stopped flowing. Her eyes, which had been so expressive and human, took on a quality of depth and mystery that made them almost alien. "Mother? Father?" she said, her voice already sounding different, more ethereal. "Who?" The robe had fully settled now, and with it came the erasure of memory. Kaguya looked around with mild curiosity, as if seeing the estate and the weeping old couple for the first time. "It is time," the leader of the moon people announced. "We must return to our realm." The procession reformed, with Kaguya now in their midst. She looked fully like one of them now, luminous, otherworldly, beautiful in a way that was almost painful to observe. She showed no recognition of the place she was leaving or the people who had been her family. As the moon people began to ascend back toward the sky, back toward the great silver disk of the full moon that dominated the heavens, Okina and his wife watched helplessly. The old man's hands were clenched into fists, his body shaking with the effort of not crying out. The old woman had collapsed to her knees, the poem her daughter had written pressed against her heart. The imperial warriors, who had been powerless to prevent this impossible abduction, could only stand and watch as the glowing procession rose higher and higher, moving up on beams of light toward the moon. As the figures grew smaller and more distant, the music that had accompanied them began to fade, the glow in the air began to dim, and the strange wind that came from nowhere began to still. Then they were gone, and the night was simply a night again, with a bright moon and stars and the normal sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. The only evidence that something extraordinary had occurred was the chest containing the elixir of life, which the moon people had left behind, and the broken hearts of the old couple who had found a glowing infant in a bamboo stalk and lost a beloved daughter to the sky. The aftermath. The emperor, who had been informed immediately when the moon people appeared, arrived at the estate the following morning. He found Okina and his wife in the garden where Kaguya had spent so many hours, the old couple appearing to have aged decades overnight. The poem their daughter had written was carefully preserved in a silk sleeve, already becoming a treasured relic. The emperor listened to the description of what had occurred, though he hardly needed to. His warriors had witnessed everything and were still shaken by the experience of facing beings that existed beyond the laws of the physical world. "She is truly gone then," the emperor said quietly. It was not really a question. "Gone," Okina confirmed, his voice rough with tears and exhaustion. "And she does not remember us, does not remember anything of her time on earth. It is as if the life we shared with her was a beautiful dream, and now we have woken to find it vanished." The emperor noticed the chest containing the elixir of life. "And this? The moon people left this as compensation? Life without her is not worth living," the old woman said bitterly. "What use is extended life when the reason for living has been taken away?" The emperor understood. He himself felt a profound loss, though he had known Kaguya only briefly. She had offered him something no one else could, a glimpse of genuine connection, of being seen as a person rather than as a position. That brief taste of something real made its loss all the more painful. Before he departed, the emperor asked for the poem Kaguya had written, and after some hesitation the old couple agreed to let him make a copy. The original would remain their treasure, but they understood that the emperor's grief, though different from theirs, was also genuine. The emperor took the poem back to the capital, and he did something that became part of the legend. He climbed to the highest point near the capital, a mountain peak that reached up toward the sky, toward the moon. There, he burned the poem along with the remaining elixir of life that the old couple had gifted to him, watching the smoke rise up toward the heavens. "Perhaps," he said to his attendants, "the smoke from this fire will reach the Moon Kingdom. Perhaps it will somehow touch the part of Kaguya that exists beyond memory, the eternal essence that experienced a human life. Perhaps in some way she will know that she was loved, that her time on earth mattered, that she left something precious behind." The mountain where he performed this ritual came to be called Mount Fuji, though the word Fuji in this context derived from Fushur, meaning immortal or deathless. The smoke from the emperor's fire was said to be the reason why the mountain's peak was sometimes shrouded in clouds and mist. The legacy. The story of Princess Kaguya became one of the most famous tales in Japanese history. It was written down and preserved, expanded and retold, adapted into plays and poetry, paintings and songs. The Take Torai Monogatari, the tale of the bamboo cutter, became one of the foundational narratives of Japanese literature, one of the oldest prose stories in the language. Okina and his wife lived for many more years, maintained in comfort by the wealth that the gold bamboo had provided, but they never recovered from their loss. They spent their remaining days tending the garden that Kaguya had loved, maintaining the estate where she had grown to adulthood, and telling her story to anyone who would listen. When they died, they were buried together in the shadow of the bamboo forest where their impossible daughter had been discovered. The 5 suitors became cautionary figures in Japanese culture, examples of how pride, deception, ambition, and obsession could lead to ruin. Their stories were told to teach lessons about honesty, humility, and the dangers of desiring something simply because it is beautiful or difficult to obtain. The emperor ruled for many more years and was remembered as a wise and compassionate leader. He never married, and court historians whispered that his heart had been given to a princess from the moon who could never be his. And the moon itself, that luminous presence in the night sky, took on deeper meaning in Japanese culture. When people looked up at the full moon, they remembered the story of Kaguya Hime, the impossibly beautiful princess who lived briefly on Earth, who taught lessons about love and loss, who reminded humanity that some things are too precious to keep, too perfect to hold, too transcendent to bind to the earthly realm. The tale of Princess Kaguya became a meditation on the nature of beauty and transience, on the Buddhist concept of mano no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. It taught that love and attachment bring both joy and sorrow, that beauty is most precious because it does not last, that life itself is meaningful precisely because it is temporary. In bamboo forests throughout Japan, on certain nights when the moon is full and bright, people claim they can still see a faint glow among the stalks, as if the divine light that once surrounded a tiny infant still lingers in the place where she was found. And parents who discover unexpected blessings in their lives, who find joy they did not expect, sometimes whisper that they have been touched by the same divine grace that once blessed an old bamboo cutter and his wife, the grace of loving something perfect, even if only for a little while. And so we close this ancient tale, this story of moonlight and bamboo, of impossible tasks and inevitable loss. The tale of Princess Kaguya reminds us that some of the most beautiful things in our lives come to us as gifts we cannot keep, that we can love deeply even while knowing that loss is certain, and that the memory of beauty and joy can outlast the things themselves. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, from the discovery of a glowing infant in a bamboo stalk to the final image of smoke rising toward Mount Fuji's peak, I thank you for your attention and your patience. Like Princess Kaguya herself, this story is a gift from the past, passed down through generations because something in it speaks to the human experience, something that transcends culture and time. If this tale has touched you, if it has made you think differently about beauty or loss, love or impermanence, then it has done its work. And perhaps tonight, when you look up at the moon, you'll remember the princess who came from there, who lived briefly among humans, and who returned to the sky leaving nothing behind but memories, poems, and a story that refuses to fade. Until our next tale, may your life be filled with moments of beauty worth holding, even if you cannot hold them forever. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of Japan's most beloved legends. The moon is rising, and somewhere in the bamboo forest, the light still glimmers.